Good afternoon or evening. This is my promised video about standardized testing. I won't be cursing, but I'm not a great fan of it, but it has its place. I made this, I took a clip out of Wikipedia just to get main points, and I put some comments on the side. So this isn't a long read because you don't have to read every word. Just look at the highlighted areas. I think that makes it efficient and not too stressful on you to do the reading. But I put a little video on there from a person. It's about 9 minutes long. Talks about some key concepts in standardized testing. Now, first of all, I'm giving you this information because I want you to have an idea of how to address the issue of standardized testing. You're going to have standardized testing. It's all around us. It's forced on us by universities, by the state of Nebraska, and by the general society as a whole. You have a vast amount of experience taking standardized tests, high stakes tests too. Obviously, you know the ACT and the SAT. You know the Praxis, which I'll mention shortly. So the point here is with this testing is that we got some terms, and I'll just give these to you as I'm talking through it, and you'll see it as you go through on the reading because you can just download the handout has my comments on it. The one point I want to put across about standardized testing is my argument that it has very little to do with learning. The process of learning is a wonderful and beautiful thing. It involves as I was about to say, had a little interruption there. Standardized testing has a very valuable place in our culture. I say that very sarcastically, but we know it's going to be with us because we can't change everything. But it's not part of the process of learning. It is it's kind of like when they take a picture trying to determine where electrons and photons are in an atom. And scientists say they actually can never say where the electron and photon are because they're constantly spinning. So they give what I would say, they make a guess about the location of where the electron is. I know you're not into quantum physics. It's a kind of a hobby of mine. But tests and standardized tests are like a snapshot of an atom, and they kind of give an idea and a general direction of where the person who took the test is probably, how well they're doing, and an estimate of their proficiency level. For instance, if we did a standardized test in Spanish, it would probably be a pretty good test because it's based on measuring your performance. And the test itself is authentic, and that's always important in tests because it's an authentic measurement of your proficiency in Spanish. Whereas some multiple choice tests that are very general, like a reading test or a math test, they're going to throw a lot of problems at you, and they're going to do a general estimate of different types of math problems, and they're going to give you a nice blend of those, and they're going to say, well, we think you're here, and you are therefore, you have an 18 on your ACT, and therefore you will still need to at least take college algebra at like UNK, or you may need to even take a intermediate algebra, or if you're really weak, like a 14, you have to take pre-algebra or elementary algebra. Now, so those tests are kind of useful, but it's like when people are ill or something, you know, a physician will run a lot of tests, but sometimes it's not till they either cut in the body or they get a really good MRI done that they can tell exactly like what's wrong with you. Do you have a broken, is your hip out of socket, or do you have some kind of a damage to a blood vessel or something? They need to do very fine tests, very expensive tests. That's another part of testing. It's expensive. Standardized tests are one heck of a moneymaker. If you want to go any further, and how much you pay for the praxis test. I've known people to take the praxis test 10 or 11 times to try to get the score they needed to get admitted to teacher ed. And those kind of tests like that are very hard cutoff, are very common in our society. Whatever, if you're going to get certification in something, whether you're going to be, you have to pass a certain score in order to get into law school, or to get the score that after you're in law school, you have to take the law exam, the bar exam, they call it. Same thing with medical school. You have exams you have to pass. And if you don't pass them, you have to study and you have to pass them. But sometimes we do that, obviously, for difficult professional certification. But if you think about it, you know, standardized tests being used on the general public is kind of a harsh measurement, because some people don't perform well on those. And yet, you know, that those individuals can perform. For instance, people don't pass the praxis, they struggle with it, and eventually they pass it. Turns out they're a fantastic teacher, because the praxis doesn't measure teaching. It measures reading, writing, and math abilities. And you have to ask yourself, what is it that a standardized test doesn't measure? Well, it doesn't measure personality, intense dedication. It doesn't measure professionalism. There's only so much a paper pencil test measures. And what it mainly measures, if it's not performance so much, it may measure knowledge level. And that's really vague, because very intelligent people can pass tests, but does that mean they can perform as a doctor, as a teacher, etc.? So that's one thing that always bothers me. I got a little bit in here in Wikipedia, because most places don't talk about it. Wikipedia does this, and what it is it talks about the history of standardized tests. And what is the history? Well, they go right back to China in ancient times, long, long ago. China has always historically, I can't tell you how many centuries ago it was, but they had a system called the Imperial Exams, which they would measure you. And it said the original one included music, archery, horsemanship, arithmetic, writing, and knowledge of rituals and ceremonies of both public and private parts. And that was used to select people to work in the Chinese government to serve the Chinese emperor. You might think that's odd. You said, why horsemanship? Well, at that time in Chinese history, you were expected, if you're going to be a government bureaucrat, you were expected to be able to ride a horse, be able to shoot an arrow. Imagine if we did that here. So, well, as a teacher, you must be able to shoot an arrow. But music, and of course, math and writing and knowledge of rituals, what you got to do to be the bureaucrat, living to work. And then later they added military strategy, the law, taxation, agriculture, and geography. Okay, and that's being updated today. I'm sure it involves computers, algorithms, and everything else. Same thing in Europe, and modeled on the Chinese exams, the British thought there has to be an exam, and if you can pass this exam, that shows you have the qualities to be a government official or some kind of a person, professional person in the British Empire. They actually have these exams when you get out of high school. They have O and A, and O are ordinary exams, and you take them in different subject areas, and A are advanced exams. Countries like Malaysia, India, so forth have inherited the British system, and they also give something like that. I can't swear if they still give it, but the idea is that if you're British or any other empire and you have these exams, they have them in Russia and stuff, that this shows that you have the intellectual firepower to have these jobs. It doesn't necessarily mean you're great at these jobs. Okay. United States, ironically, we didn't begin standardized testing till really the 20th century. And a lot of these tests came out in college. They examined your application, or you made application. I'm sure you had to write a letter, get recommendations. And they didn't so much have tests. A lot of it was very, very much your social status and your connections, which is still very important. But in World War I, the United States came into kind of the modern world, and they had to organize the army. And they said, well, we've got all these soldiers, but potential soldiers, we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how smart they are. We don't know, we had to do physical exams and everything on them, make sure they're healthy. And so they developed a series of tests, and they talk about it here. I think they probably moved these on and gave some of these to, and maybe even intelligence tests. I'd have to look at this. But they gave tests like this to people from both the military and other individuals. Anyone they decided to test, they want to find out how smart they were, and could they, like, for instance, the ones that have a higher IQ, and we can debate the value of the IQ test. The whole nature of intelligence is very interesting. But they did know if you took a test, if you were good at math, and you could become an officer. So exams, as far as multiple choice type, with an absolute correct answer or incorrect answer, that was a product of the 20th century in the United States. State testing didn't begin till when I was in high school. A sneeze on camera. Didn't mask. I hope you're okay. But we began all kinds of state testing, and now it's just a craze. You've gone through a lot. We had the Iowa basic tests of skills. There's a California test when I was younger. There were Elementary and Secondary Education Act 65. They started requiring exams. They wanted to make schools accountable, and how could they be accountable? Students had to take a test and get a certain score. And that was evidence of achievement and potentially ability, and that showed the schools were doing their job. Now, of course, the thing that's going to complicate this is a large number of English second language learners, as well as individuals with learning disabilities of various types. And then we got into issues of low-income kids that didn't perform very well because they didn't have the advantages of being read to as much, possibly by their parents. And then, of course, because a lot of these individuals were of a certain ethnic group or something like that, or linguistic group. And then gradually it became a negative, a stain. Oh, they're not scoring well, they're going to lower our scores. I talk about this more on my comments, but I just want to introduce you because it's a current and ongoing aggravation to me. Now, of course, standardized tests are not like the tests that you take in your class, your quiz. A teacher makes a test. It may or may not be a particularly accurate test, but usually a teacher will design a test that you have to perform something, maybe in a chemistry lab, that you need to be able to go through the steps in order to I don't know, properly prepare for an experiment, or how to execute an experiment, you know, separating water into hydrogen and oxygen. But it's a skill test. The same thing if you're in welding, it's more of a hands-on type test. You come up with a kind of a thing we call a rubric. I've never liked the word, but the idea is a rubric. It tells you what you need to know in order to do the test. Kind of teaches the test, actually. And that's not something I'm a big fan of, but it depends on the skill. You know, in medical school, they call it training, because what they're doing is they're training you what to do when a person comes in and they have a broken arm. What are the steps you take? You don't get to, you know, think about it and say, well, I think this would be cool to try something new. No, you're taught exactly what you're supposed to do. So you're expected to reproduce and know those steps. The same, you know, how to prepare tax returns. People that take accounting classes, you don't get to invent your own accounting system. You have to follow the pattern. You are trained as an accountant. I'm not saying there isn't critical thinking there, but there is a form. You must follow the form in order to do it. It's a professional thing. Same thing with lawyers to some extent. I mean, sure, they come up with unusual defenses for criminal trials or different ways to file a lawsuit, but they have to be very good critical thinkers, and they still have to be able to follow the expectations of the court. And they have to follow the rules, like rules of evidence and rules of procedure and how to file a lawsuit. Those things you can invent. You have to follow the pattern that's established. Now, when we come to teaching, are you trained as a teacher, or are you allowed to think of new and different ways to improve instruction? I think something very interesting here that would be a good topic for us and even my graduate classes is how much freedom you have to teach. When I say freedom, I don't mean freedom to just try anything, but I mean how to create a situation that is engaging to students and will help them learn the material. What does it mean to learn? Does it mean to learn so you can do a multiple choice test after you've taken your Spanish unit lesson, and then, okay, now you're giving 4 options for the correct form for the future tense, plural, you know, like nosotros, and then we're going to do something, iremos, I think it's iremos, and that's the future tense. And so you could actually have the exact correct answer on there, and the person has to choose. Now, maybe they're going to have a more, what I call non-criterion, what I want to say, not criterion referenced, which is that I want you to be able to perform this without me giving you 4 options. You have to know the correct answer. And if you don't know it, then I get to choose if I give you full credit or part credit. But I'm interested in getting you to the point that you know the future tense of we are going to go somewhere, or we're going to smoke a cigarette or something like that. Vamos a fumar un cigarrillo, los cigarrillos or something. But the point is, what you as a teacher will want to use as your criterion or criteria, that's plural, is that you don't really want to create a multiple choice test. Now, why don't you? First of all, they talk about that on the video. Multiple choice tests take a long time to produce. Teachers don't have a lot of time to do that. So that might take you a while. A lot of times people just simply put something down. I want you to be able to translate this from English, put it into Spanish. That's not bad. Or they could even do an oral exam where you have to perform in class, and they grade, and you said, did you use the right form? Yes or no? And if you didn't, you need to go back and we're going to reteach it. So if we're engaged in the business of improving your performance in Spanish or in mathematics or improving your writing, then we have to have a lot of interactions. Not everybody's going to be at the same place at the same time. And knowledge is a performance thing. It's the ability to act, or if you're in acting class, or your ability to do a mathematics problem and do it correctly, that you know what needs to go next. And I often think that it's very useful in learning to have the teacher very carefully and cautious, directly engaged with you while you're thinking through. And so I can say, oh, well, you're using the wrong tense in Spanish. You've got the wrong concept of the future tense. And maybe you've got that all fundamentally wrong and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. So let's go in and correct that. I believe in teaching writing, that it would be very interesting to actually have students work on a paper in class, maybe 2 or 3 people together, and each of them's writing, but they spend time checking each other out and looking where they are as they write their essay. And this would be different than having the teacher wait till you write the essay, wait till they take it home, wait till 2 weeks go by, wait till they write a bunch of red lines on it, they give it back to you and they write a B+, needs improvement. And you look at the B+, say, well, that's good enough grade, I'm done. There's no learning there, right? The same with the Spanish or the math problem. If you make a mistake on the standardized test, if they made a standardized test or something like it, the time from the moment you're thinking and you make the error or you get confused, that very moment needs to be addressed. It would be great to have a person there on the spot. It'd be like having you go off and you're driving someplace and you never get there because nobody was talking to you at the time you made the wrong turn. There is a big gap between the use of standardized tests and actual learning. Standardized tests are a way of kind of estimating what your ability might be in math or whatever it is, but it's very removed from the individual because you, in the moment that you're learning and you're trying to perform something, if you were being taught how to saddle a horse and stuff, you don't want somebody saying, oh, you missed a step, you fell off the horse. You'd want somebody right there with you saying, oh, you didn't get this strap, you got to bring this around, or you got to put this bit in a horse's mouth after, not before, because otherwise he's going to kick you, you know? That's why you don't do driver's ed by taking multiple choice tests and somebody just puts you in a car and says, good luck, go driving, you know? And you say, well, I remember this stuff from the book. No, it's a hands-on performance. Thinking is a hands-on performance, believe it or not. All this stuff where you learn history and stuff, and then people ask you, what are the causes of the Civil War? And you've memorized, you know, argument over slavery, economic dependence on slavery, arguments about the expansion of slavery in Western states. I mean, it's great you would know that. I can rattle those off now. But what's the difference between that and having an actual discussion where you can talk with the student or talk among yourselves and say, oh yeah, I never thought about that. Thinking in a group thinking or group, whatever it is, training, however you want to think about it. My argument is that testing is so removed from the immediacy of learning. I don't think I ever see that. So there are terms here, and it says norm reference test, and norm reference means that you're being measured against generally a large group of people that are similar to you or smarter than you or not as sharp in that particular area. And so they'll say, this is where you are. If I got measured in art, you know, that's funny. They never do art exam tests. No, they can do them in art history, but they can't give you an art test and say, aha, you are an artist because you got more multiple choice answers than somebody else. Art has resisted this. What about music? You don't test someone's ability to play the piano by giving them a multiple choice test. It's performance, right? Critical thinking is often measured by reading or making decisions. You know, they have some interesting tests on multiple choice that talk about your ability to do logic. I'm not saying that's that far off, but a lot of times the format of the test doesn't match the performance. You can get a good feel for a person's knowledge of history and ability to think, like you want to be a lawyer, you're taking the law school admissions test. You can infer a lot from the performance on that test with their ability to perform in law school, because it's going to be very heavily dependent on logic, on mathematics, and especially on vocabulary. Because if you don't have the vocabulary, you don't do well on the test, you're not going to do well in law school. There's certain places where you have to make a decision. You have to look and say, well, this is what you need to be, if you're going to be repairing combines, you have to go through training. You have to learn all the steps how to repair a combine. It's not critical thinking. There may be critical thinking in repairing a car or something, but it's not going to be as simple as that. So there's really something interesting. You got a little chart here on one of the pages, about 4 pages in or 5 pages in. It says sample scoring for a history question, what caused World War II? And the student 1 says, student answer, what caused World War II? And he said, Hitler invaded Poland. And they'll say, well, technically that's correct, but that's really just the last effect. Somebody was arguing today, I was reading, what causes fatalities from COVID? And somebody wrote, oh, their heart failed. Well, that's when you died. But what happened before that? Pneumonia. What happened before that? You got an infection. It was from COVID, and then it affected your diabetes and affected this set of things, and that's what killed you. But you can't make the argument because COVID is not the last thing that happened. Oh no, COVID didn't bother him at all. We know you get heart trouble from diabetes, and sometimes before that you get COVID, and it combines with that. So the cause and effect is being monkeyed with there very badly. And now you see one here, it said World War II was caused by multiple factors. Well, this is a very good answer because World War II was not the product of one thing, but of several, a combination of factors. Just like COVID deaths, just like depressions and economic growth and a whole bunch of things. It's not one thing that does it, but a multiple number of factors. Human tendencies want to be simplistic, Well, we've got inflation that causes a recession. Well, now we're spending money we don't have in the COVID crisis and the recession caused by it. And so far we don't have inflation. And people would say, well, that's not supposed to happen. And now we have to examine what is the cause and effect in economic growth. It's not as simple as I was taught years ago. We were always taught if the government spends too much money and prints too much money, then it causes inflation. But right now we don't have inflation. Or do we? Or maybe we do. So World War II was caused by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Now that's interesting. Not only is it wrong, but it's the wrong war because he died in the First World War. So you could pretty much say that's totally wrong, Now here's the problem with the non-standardized grading on the right column is you got a teacher there saying, well, I want to give him some credit. But that's not a very good answer. Well, I'm not really opposed to that, but you should give points when they're deserved, not give credit because it's grammatically correct. One of the secrets of writing a good multiple choice test is you got to make sure that all the items and the fill in the blanks, if you have that, have to be grammatical because a kid can argue, wait, that answer doesn't work because it's not grammatical. Just thought I'd give you that clue in case some professor says, oh, you got the answer wrong. I said, but the answer you say right won't fit in the blank. That's an old trick I learned, you can argue. I want an extra point for that, or I want that crossed off the test. It shouldn't count. Now, 2 considerations that I want to give you very quickly, and it talks about it. Reliability and validity. And it's in that little video. Reliability is simply this. It means that the same thing, if I take a thermometer And I thought I had one here, but oh yeah, I do. If I take a thermometer and I put it in my mouth, I turn it on first, and I'm not going to keep it in 60 seconds. I don't think you want to watch it. But I keep it in and I take it out of 60 seconds and it says, okay, I got a temperature of 91.4, which is what it says now. Let's say I kept it in 60 seconds again, 1 minute later. And suddenly it says 96.5. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I started over again. I put it in my mouth and I got two totally different scores. What does it mean? It's not reliable. It's like not showing up for work, okay, when you're working at McDonald's. You're not a reliable employee. Any kind of test, no matter how good a teacher thinks it is or somebody, if it's not reliable, just throw it out. You might as well just be rolling dice to come up with the result on the test, okay? So reliability can be measured in many ways, but reliability means reproducibility. I can depend on this thermometer to measure my temperature accurately. And the same thing, I've got a pair of scales here. If suddenly the scales say I'm losing 20 pounds, and then 10 pounds, I lost 10 pounds, and then I lost 20, and then I gained 10 pounds, I know it's time to toss the very expensive digital scales away. They're no good to me. All right, so now my next thing I want to talk about, and that's enough reliability. There's a lot of ways to talk about it, but that's one of the easiest ways. I'll put this wonderful thermometer back. Okay, now, the other term, which it talks a little bit about here, I don't know if it talks a lot about it here, is validity. Now, validity can be measured in many ways. What you want to ask yourself is what I'm asking on this test, or what this test is asking, is this going to be legit? Is this going to measure what it says it measures? If I take an ACT test and the ACT says you got a 24 on math, good news, you don't have to take college algebra. You can go right into algebra 2 or into calculus. Now let's say you get that score on that test and you say to yourself, I'm going to medical school. I want to make sure I get good grades. Do I want to jump into calculus right as my first class, or calculus 2 as my first class in college? Do you have faith that that score is correct? Or would you say to yourself, I think I'm just going to take a refresher? Same thing with physics, same thing with Spanish, same thing with English. Do you want to jump ahead and play in the upper bracket, or would you rather take a year or a semester to warm up your arm a little bit so you're able to perform, you know? Now, ACT is pretty accurate. They do predict a lot of things. Now, if we say they predict success in college, generally, yes, but you got to take that with a massive amount of crystals of salt, because what are the other factors that ensure success in college? Stability, economic, financial aid, maturity, motivation. Let's say you go to college and you're not very, you like to study. I liked to study years ago when I went to college. I didn't study real intensely. I got by because I was a very good, fast reader and I could pick up stuff fast. And I was an excellent test taker. So had I said, I'm going to go to medical school, I can just kind of BS my way through it and outsmart the tests. Guess what? I got a really high score on math in the ACT. My score was in the top 2%. Now, I'm going to sneeze again, but I'm going to let you see this one too. Here we go. Where's the sun when you need to sneeze? I got a really high score, and I could have skipped a way up on math and started a much higher level. I didn't trust my score in the ACT. I thought, wow, that's really good. Now, I became a history major in political science and English and Spanish. So math didn't really matter, so it didn't matter. But had I decided to be a mathematician, or had I decided to be some other, scientist or something where math's huge and you have to be really good, there is no way I would have jumped up and skipped the first year of mathematics. I would have at least started in college algebra. I wouldn't have skipped it. So I don't trust the test, even though it told me things. Now, my test told me I was not very good in English. My worst score was English. I got in the 75th percentile. Now, if you don't know what that is, they convert scores, and then they don't do this so much anymore, but I know there's a way they convert scores, and if you get like a 32 on ACT, you can actually look over here and it says you're in the top 1% of everybody that took the ACT. If that's your overall score, you are really sharp. At least in this test, it says that. Does that mean you're going to be successful? No, I've seen people that are labeled geniuses and they just wasted their time for years because they were convinced they were a genius, and why work? I don't have to prove myself. I'm smart. Okay, that's why humility is a great ally. Okay, now, the same thing occurs when you don't get a good score. Oh, I got a terrible score in English. I don't think I can go to college. What are the factors that might have caused you not to do well in English? Well, there are reliability factors. One is maybe you were sick that morning. Maybe you were nervous. Maybe you have an anxiety attack when somebody's walking around saying 30 more minutes. Or if you're writing, and I know there's a section where you do writing on the praxis. And I've known people say, oh my gosh, I'm doing the praxis score. I'm doing it on a computer. I've got to write an essay. I've got a blank sheet. I've got an idea of what they want me to write, but I have writing anxiety or test anxiety. And somehow I start to write my first sentence and I'm not sure. And then I back off and then I waste 10 minutes thinking about it. And then I can't get enough written to get a score. You see what I mean? It helps to rehearse, especially when you have to perform something like writing. Just like if you're going to play a piano, you don't want to just walk in there and saying, here's a sheet of music. You're kind of familiar with it. Start playing. And you get a little nervous and you doubt yourself, and suddenly emotions start blocking your ability to perform or to think. So those are factors that can interfere. Now we talk about the validity of a test. The validity of a test, is it truly an indication of your abilities? Does it do what the test claims it's going to show? Does it show what the test claims it's going to show? You may be underperforming by a large amount. This means you may get into college, but you may not be a strong test taker. And what do? Some people say you can go and practice tests, and I do believe in that. I think you get confidence. Practicing's good. It's like swinging the bat in softball. If you just go up and start swinging the bat and you haven't taken any practice swings or even had batting practice, you're not going to know what it feels like to swing the bat. You're not going to be very confident in your ability or how you should set your feet, or should you swing it outside pitches and something. If it's fast pitch, I definitely would be in trouble. I was a slow pitch pitcher, and I could take advantage of people because I was very accurate, and I knew if I got 2 strikes in slow pitch, I'd just throw them an inside pitch and let them just wail away at it because it's going to be foul, Or if I had a guy that couldn't hit it out of the park, I just let him hit the long fly. See, some guys love it. Hey, it's a long fly. Well, it's an out, but it was almost a homer. I said, you might as well have struck out. It's that exciting. Always want a good outfielder. So validity, when you look at it, is what the test measuring is that logical? Do you think your ACT test questions measured your ability in math? Do you think your ability to write was measured by either your praxis or by the writing multiple choice questions they use in ACT, SAT? You know, they give you and they say which one is the correct answer for the proper grammar. Okay, that's Three Stooges interrupting. I'm trying to get this done. You don't want to reach the point as a teacher where you're teaching the test. There's a lot of pressure to teach the test, and I really highlighted several sections of this in color and said read these sections near the end of this handout, because this is the real problem with testing, and that is that the test can be used to do terrible things to a student. And most of you have been victims of that in some kind of exam. There are a few people, I was one of them, I was always good at guessing the right answer. I always felt like I'm just playing a game and I'm trying to beat them at their own game. And so I saw it as a game. And if you see it as a game, it's kind of fun. But if you see it as an attempt to destroy your life, that's another thing. So what are the advantages of standardized tests? Well, the advantages, it gives you some guidance. It gives you a general idea how well you're doing compared to other people. It's nothing wrong with it. If you're competitive, it's good. It might provide information to parents about how their child is doing. It can let people know that, well, in this math test, a bunch of students, and generally we're talking groups is where the real information is. A large number of students from this school were not able to handle quadratic equations. And then they know, we got to teach that because we're not doing a good job with it. That's a useful thing to get from but it's almost like the test is almost like taking the temperature of a group of people as opposed to taking your temperature. That's an important quote. I want you to remember it because it's how the learner benefits from assessment that really makes assessment important in the learning process. Therefore, what are the disadvantages? I think I have those on here. I don't know. Disadvantages. It doesn't, if it's a fair test, then the test may cause you to be pushed out of school. It may cause people whose students do not perform well to not get promoted, to lose their jobs, and to have the raw score or even the adjusted score, however you want to see it. It's an attempt to make the score intelligible to people. It may say, oh, your students aren't doing well on the test, and therefore, what are you going to do? You're going to teach the test. And so instead of teaching knowledge or thinking critically or wisdom or any of these things, you simply say, okay, you got to know the answers for causes of the Civil War. We're going to memorize writing that super little paragraph until you know how to produce it like clockwork. And then it becomes a guessing game because then you think, wow, what are the types of questions we might get? Civil War is a big one. So we can almost bet on a question on that because we're not going to get a question on the bank failures of 1893 because that's peculiar and most people don't want to even talk about that. The causes of the Great Depression, the causes of World War II, the causes of is going to be a great thing to bet on. How the United States formed its government and had House representatives decided by population representation and a Senate, which each state has 2 senators. Why the big state and small state plans were combined into those 2 offices. And is that a good form for government now? And now we're finding out that it's not. Because then minorities can overrule majorities. So, my general feeling personally is that standardized tests are great to measure big things in large numbers of people, but not very useful as for their impact on the individual. I've seen people get a 12 on English on the ACT. And then when they went to school, they struggled some in English. They weren't a bad writer, and they got passing grades, got a B in English 1 at UNK. And people just said, with a 12, you can't even go to college. You can't even scribble. But the test wasn't a test of their writing ability. It was a test of their ability to correct grammar and to determine the rules of grammar and things like that. Now, how much does grammar represent in terms of intelligence or ability to be articulate? And unless the person happens to like grammar, the rules of grammar don't have much to do as long as you know the proper usage in your own language. You can be very eloquent and not know why the rules are. You can speak fluent French and you may not be able to explain to anyone why are you using a certain performance there? What are the rules for this? And that's almost like asking, I'm a great race car driver, but why is it you can't adjust the fuel flow for the tank or something like that? Do you know how to do that? I said, no, we have a mechanic that does that. I said, all I do is I have a car that performs according to the standards that we've established, and I know how to drive it in a group of race car drivers and how to come out ahead. And that's using it. You don't have to know what a car is in order to use a car. If airplane pilots had to know all the mechanics aspects of their airplane, and they do know a lot because you want them to know a lot about the airplane. It beats me, I don't know why it's not working. No, they have to know. But the point is, you can use your body and do all kinds of things, but if your stomach is giving you trouble, you don't know what's going on with your stomach. If it's not performing, you have to go to a doctor and find out why. So that's my argument about standardized tests. They're useful for the masses, but pretty worthless for the individual, except for bragging rights or for feeling bad if you don't perform. And wisdom and learning is about the desire to learn, curiosity. And I've never seen a test that measures curiosity. You know, maybe a psychological test of some kind, but that's not going to be a test you can do by the mass. And remember one thing, testing is big money, big business. And the more they can get people to go for massive tests and state tests, the more companies make money off of it. And of course, what do they suggest when you ask about what should I do with standardized? We need to get another standardized test, you know? That's my opinion. And I'm gonna be quiet now. I hope that little video on testing is useful to you. I like to look at ESL students, and your opinion is that a lot of you have struggled with tests. Think about ESL students. It doesn't measure their intelligence. It, in a way, standardized tests, if they're given to ESL students, it's totally inappropriate. Imagine if you had to perform and give a history exam and you had to take it in Japanese or French or Spanish, and you don't know much Spanish or French or none, you just wouldn't know anything. It'd be totally irrelevant. So that's one of the arguments that I expect you when you're teaching English learners, that you're going to be an advocate for them. That's what I do in all my classes. You're an advocate. You can't just say, oh, this is okay or something. If you had the ELPA test, and we'll be talking about it in detail with state people, you have to, I think it's much better than it used to be. It's the ELPA test is designed and standardized. The criteria is English second language learners. It's measuring their ability in English. That's its focus. It's not a history test that happens to be in English. That's where the focus is. Okay, I'm gonna be quiet now because I talk too much, okay? I don't talk too much, I just mutter too much.